Welcome, everyone, in spite of the heat. When Andrea came to me and asked, actually, she initially asked me to do an appraisal day, and then asked if I would do two, and I said sure, and then she sprung on me, well, one of them will be a talk instead, and she kind of snuck that in on me. But when we were having the conversation, and she brought up how there is this disagreement, even controversy among people about what is and is not a Nantucket basket, I thought, well, you don't have to look any further for a great thing to talk about, because there shouldn't be a controversy. It should be pretty easy. There's an entire science to this, taxonomy, that works for birds, fish, flowers. You pick up a Dichotomous Key, a field guide, and it's very definitive. Is this or is this not what you're looking at? There's general rules and things that we all agree on how to go about doing this, so it shouldn't be hard to do the same thing for baskets. The main strategy they use is, as I said, a dichotomous key, where the choices, the criteria come down to a yes or no. And there's no room for maybes or sometimes or gee, I don't know if that's a basket or not. You ask a series of questions and either it is or it isn't, and that defines your whole category. To start with, we really have to look at the history. If you talk to dealers, collectors, if you go online and read about histories of Nantucket baskets, you see a lot of different ideas put forward of varying merit. Some just really don't hold water at all. One of the first ones people like to talk about is that the Nantucket basket descended from the Native American baskets out here. The Indians made baskets here, and that evolved into the Nantucket basket. Doesn't hold water. Indians made baskets here and everywhere, but everyone in the world made baskets. If you wanted to say because someone was out here making a basket, then you could say this is derived from an Egyptian basket from 5000 BC. There's just no direct line between the Native American baskets and what are made here. The Wampanoag, just like the Abenaki, most of the rest of the New England Indians, made baskets like these, splint baskets, shaved splint, wood, woven bottoms. They may or may not have a rim. They come in various shapes and sizes and various little curlicues and dies. I could not find my example of the other type of basket, so I took a photograph of one. The Indians also made pine needle baskets, very, very long needles that they coiled and wove, and sometimes did great little embroidery with, but that's what the traditional basket on Nantucket would have looked like, made by the various Native Americans here. These are both 19th century. Actually, this is a good example. This has a sweetgrass braid as well. That would be the other type of basket the Indians made. That could be up to the 1920s or so, 1930s. They were made for the tourist trade. Throughout New England, in the summer, a lot of Abenaki, Mi'kmaq would come down the coastline selling baskets. It was part of a New England tradition. But that was the basket the Native Americans were making here, which obviously looks nothing at all, does not resemble these baskets at all. Another idea thrown out there is that these came from the whale ships, that the origins of the Nantucket basket was on the whale ship. There's no evidence that I've ever found for that at all. There are sailor-made baskets that are fancy ropework, what became macrame. Individuals, since on whale ships you have people from all over the world, from every possible walk of life. Inevitably there were people that made baskets from wherever they were from, but there's no whaling basket, no whaleman's basket. Certainly didn't look anything at all like this. There were people on whale ships who, after retiring here on Nantucket, ended up making Nantucket baskets. There's no indication that they learned that trade, that craft, while they were still on board the whale ships, rather than after they came on shore and were learning from their neighbors who were serving on the lightships. A lot of those retired whalemen actually became captains of the lightships and made baskets, signed baskets from the lightships. The fact that before retiring in an earlier life they had this other job does not mean that the baskets arose in that earlier job. There's just no evidence for that I have found. Ships' logbooks and journals describe absolutely everything pertinent information as well as completely irrelevant information. We have great evidence from logbooks about scrimshaw, about all the other crafts that sailors are doing. I'm not aware of a single mention on any of the Nantucket logbooks of them making Nantucket baskets or what became a Nantucket basket on board any of those ships. So there's a big gap there. There's a leap of faith to try to make that history. The other thing which does bear water is New Hampshire. The original proprietors of Nantucket included the Coffin family, who owned Dover, New Hampshire. Dover in those days was everything, the entire seacoast, even most of what is today Portsmouth, everything outside of the Strawberry Banks was considered Dover, and it went about 200 miles inland, dense forest, and the Coffin family had a monopoly here. There was a law in Nantucket that you could not bring any wood or wood-derived products to Nantucket unless you bought it from them, from their forests. So in those days, we were almost part of New Hampshire, constant ship traffic back and forth, bringing wood, paper. And in New Hampshire, there was a long tradition of basket making. The New Hampshire work basket, or farm basket, work basket really, had a very unique form, unlike any other basket that I'm aware of from around the country or world. It had, luckily this is very conveniently broken to show you, it had a solid wooden bottom plate, split to receive staves that would tuck right into that bottom plate. Sound familiar? A wooden rim or a solid rim, also split to receive the staves in between. And then the difference from what would later come on is it was woven with splint, like they'd learned from the Native Americans. The Shakers invented these great little hand machines to shave splints like this for basket weaving. So these were all over Nantucket, had to have been all over Nantucket in those early days from the 17th century onwards, from the trade with New Hampshire. So we did have this here as a tradition to draw on. That's a very good indication of where these all came from. I think there's really no question that that's where these all evolved from. Now to get into defining it, you have to come up with certain criteria. The one that's probably said the first, and I hear the most, is that, well, it has to be made on Nantucket. There's a lot of very strong, adamant adherence to that it must be made on Nantucket. And unfortunately, that really just doesn't work. That can't be a criteria. In most cases, we don't know. If that was a defining characteristic, that we know that they would have to have been made here, then the vast majority of antique baskets would be eliminated. All those ones from the Lightship that aren't signed, we couldn't consider a Nantucket basket because we have no actual proof. Unless you were there that day, it's what looks like a duck and walks like a duck, but unless you were in the pond with the duck, you can't prove that it was made on the Lightship. You wouldn't be able to call it a Nantucket basket. Some makers do both. Up till today, you look at like Jerry Brown, for instance. He's a long-time, very well-respected, admired basket maker down on South Wharf. There's no question no one would ever think of claiming that his baskets were not a Nantucket basket. He's here all summer long weaving them. In the off-season, he's back with his family in Amesbury? Somewhere North Shore, as I recall. And he's weaving all winter. So if we took the island criteria, half of his baskets aren't Nantucket baskets, the other half are. The two side by side on a shelf, we would not be able to tell apart, but we're trying to say then that half of those aren't. You can see how this just leads to disaster. There's no future in that definition. If you got picky, you'd have to admit that the lightships themselves were off island. That whole first generation weren't being made here on the island. The South Shoals Lightship is really more part of New York than us. It's guarding the entrance into New York Harbor at the southern tip of the Nantucket South Shoals. It doesn't work. It's understandable why a lot of people want to use that criteria. There's an agenda. There's a very legitimate desire to protect the identity, to protect the market. But there's no room in a taxonomy for that. It works for a Nantucket Bay scallop, same species, identical to scallops everywhere else, but those we can prove were made on Nantucket. They're dredged up out of the waters here. That's provable. You can call it a Nantucket scallop as opposed to a Wellfleet or a Long Island Bay. But with the baskets, there's just no way to do it. If they had all signed them, if the majority of those old baskets had been signed and we could prove that they were made here, we could have a different discussion. But as is, not. Another one I've run into that kind of surprised me is more and more people are saying that a defining characteristic of the Nantucket basket is that it's made on a mold. Great stack of molds conveniently right here. That doesn't work either. I'm not sure about the rest of the history of baskets in the world, if baskets elsewhere are made on molds or not. If they were, that kind of knocks that one out. But even just of the ones that we know are made here on Nantucket, they weren't always made on molds. A lot of the Lightship period baskets were not made on molds. In more modern times, Jose Reyes, the best known, or the most sought after of the modern makers, early on did not use molds. That's a square bottom or rectangular bottom that evolves into an oval basket. That could not be done on a mold. That's a free form to go from one shape to another. Even more dramatic were his creel-shaped baskets. Can't be done on a mold. And as a result of not being done on a mold, you could get these great little shapes. What, like in furniture, would be called Bombay, where it swells out, it bulges. Gorgeous feature. That comes from being free woven, not having been done on a mold. This might show, yeah, actually even a little more dramatic, that little like bulging to it. Gorgeous, isn't it? It's another creel. If you look at...
We have to change our spiel.
No more molds.
Sorry. And if you look at a lot of the really, really old Lightship baskets, you see a lot of ones that are, tilting off to starboard. They're bulging, they're warped, they're not oval, they're amorphous. It's because they weren't done on a mold, so the tension of the weave as they're going is tighter and looser and causes these aberrations. Now, when I first started in antiques in the early 80s, this was universally known. All the dealers, all the collectors knew that this was the case and would often talk about this is a freeform basket. This is a freeform Reyes or a freeform Lightship basket, as opposed to being made on a mold. They were all aware of it and appreciated it, and it usually added a premium to it. A free-form basket usually brought a higher price than one made on a mold, because it was just that much more unique, individualistic, artistic. Another interesting thing that occurred to me when I was preparing for this, when I was first out on Nantucket, I worked with Alan Reed and Nat Plank, and they always referred to these, as they had been taught, as speed molds. They weren't just straight molds, they were speed molds, indicating from the early generation that you can weave a basket, but if you use a mold, you can do this much quicker. It's holding the shape, you don't have to fight with it. So yeah, the molds have taken over today. I don't think there's too many people doing freeform. Napa certainly does occasionally. But it's not a defining characteristic. It can't be a defining characteristic because there's too many not made with a mold. So what we're left with is the morphology, just like in all those old dichotomous keys. If you look up a guide to fish, they're asking things that can be seen, measured, proven. They're tangible, provable characteristics. With fish, does it have 3 dorsal fins? If no, then it's definitely not in the cod family. You have to go by things that can be proven. So with baskets, it really comes right back down to the morphology, the shape, the form. A Nantucket basket has a solid wooden bottom plate, split to receive staves. Same in this, the rim is split to receive the staves. It then has cane. That's the other great characteristic. They're cane woven instead of splint woven. And I'm not aware of any other basket in the world that has those characteristics in combination. There's other features we often see. Handles, but they're certainly not on all baskets. Scrimshaw, on many, not all. You can have some weaves of baleen. You might even bound to be one out there, and an exception to the rule, the entire thing is woven out of baleen. That would be an exception. These are all features, fine details, but not defining characteristics. It comes down to those major characteristics that I would say define what is and is not a Nantucket basket. If it walks like a duck, it's a duck. If it's made like a Nantucket basket, that is a Nantucket basket. Instead of questions, arguments? Complaints?
We're dashed.
Shouldn't be. It's clarity. It shows the reality. It accounts for the history more of what has come before, where these came from, and it's a glorious history. There's not a need to say, oh, those whalers on those long voyages started weaving baskets. The actual provable history is absolutely fascinating out on the lightships. Yeah, don't be dashed.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
How do you categorize the more modern baskets that are being made out of non-traditional materials? Like the baleen. I've seen baskets made entirely of baleen that look like Nantucket.
Like a lot of the coming from Alaska.
Well, Fred Healy makes them too, based on what's coming out of Alaska.
Yeah, it's, and the inlay, solid wooden tops with inlay. There are a lot of these variations. It's like any craft, any living craft is continuing to evolve. 30 years from now, 50 years from now, there might be an entirely different definition. It might have to be expanded to include these other variations. There are Nantucket baskets that aren't baskets. Furniture. Michael Caine made a fountain, didn't he? I think there's
Three-tiered sewing.
I've seen those. Yeah.
Lamps and
Coffee tables, mirrors, lampshades. I know of someone who very sacrilegiously made a Frisbee.
So what's the difference between a Nantucket basket and a lightship basket?
Well, all lightship baskets would be Nantucket baskets.
Right.
They're still all, they're Nantucket, they're called Nantucket baskets. In the history of the Nantucket baskets, they divide history up into various stages. The initial stage when these were first made were on board the Nantucket Lightships, 1850s up to it was around 1917 or so, somewhere around there, where the Washington said, not on our time.
54, 57.
I thought,
Much earlier.
yeah, much earlier.
Much earlier than that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it even got into the 20s, which is why it died out, and Mitchie Ray was the last one, we think, alive, still making them on island. So the ones referred to as being lightship baskets properly, if you want to be very picky, would be referring only to those baskets that were made on board the lightships. Otherwise, it's a Nantucket basket. Silvaro, Mitchie Ray, were working up on Orange Street, working on land, had not served on the lightships. Technically, their baskets would be Nantucket baskets, but not lightship baskets. Since lightships were the original, they're all referred to as lightship baskets, or on eBay, lighthouse baskets, or who knows what else. The local people making the baskets didn't make that differentiation. They knew them. They were just baskets, and they made baskets. They weren't that concerned about this type of defining that we're doing. So it was right up probably to Jose Reyes. They were probably mostly all still being called lightship baskets until Jose called his friendship baskets, because he saw very clearly that he was not part of that lighthouse tradition. He was
We found too, they were called in the newspaper and in the agricultural fair records, they were called rattan.
rattan baskets being what they're made out of. Yeah. Yeah, which would make perfect sense.
I think lightship baskets was more of a marketing tool in some senses.
Could be,
They were
yeah.
trying to
Because they
bring that nostalgia.
brought them all on shore and sold them. And we will not infrequently find baskets with penciled in on the bottom their prices from back then, and you see like 15 cents on these great old lightship baskets. 60 was a big one too. Another thing I thought about when I was thinking about molds and how they're not all made on molds, the antique basket that I've always been the most fascinated with were the feather gathering baskets. These huge, huge oversized baskets that had a lid. One of the few baskets from the Lightship period that did have a lid. They were for gathering feathers, eiderdown, to stuff pillows, things like that. So if all baskets were made on a mold, the size of it would have been like 3 times the size of that bottom one. You'd kill yourself. You'd need 2 oxen and a block and tackle to lift your basket mold up and around while you're making it.
Take you a long time to weave it.
Yeah, a lot of patience. Or like Martin, use really wide staves. That would help. Other comments, questions?
On the Lightship, did they have all the woodworking material on the Lightship?
I've heard that they did. I couldn't swear to that. I've heard that there were lathes on some. They wouldn't need that to be the case. They were certainly here on land. And you could make your staves, make all those supplies, and take them up in the same way that John Keane did, and sent them to Skerries. You could make your supplies here. Actually, I don't think they had lathes on. I don't know if they had lathes.
Excuse me?
I'm not sure if they did have lathes on board the lightships. In Charles Carpenter's research on Nantucket antiques and crafts, he had found evidence of only 2 wood-turning lathes on island during that time period.
Okay.
And it pointed out to us, I don't have a lightship basket, an early theory on how to identify makers of the old baskets that were unsigned. We're looking at the number, shape, and configuration, size of the concentric rings turned in the bottom.
Okay.
That was mostly the sealers. Catherine Seal and her husband foisted that theory on us. And Carpenter pointed out, well, there's only 2 lathes to turn those on island, so it's not an indication. If it's an indication of anything, it wouldn't be so much the maker of the basket, as it would be more an indication of which of the 2 guys who own the lathes you went to turn the plates for you. Others? Or am I free now?
What's the best find you've had as an antique dealer with Nantucket baskets? Do you find most of them on island, tucked away in the
you added at the tail end, you added on that little proviso of with baskets. 'Cause the best find, I was going to say my wife, of course. Aww. My best find as a Nantucket basket, there have been a couple of baskets known to exist that end in lollipop staves. Instead of the stave being cut off right at the rim, they extend beyond it and are cut off in a round lollipop shape. A couple of them heart-shaped. An elderly woman brought me a basket that she bought on Nantucket in the early 1970s at an antique shop out here, and had it tucked away in her closet since, 40 years? More. And it was a double lollipop. Not only did the staves end in that, but down below, the staves had a matching circle cut out right through the staves. So you had the round hole and then the round solid up above. That's the only one I've ever seen.
Is that the most expensive basket you've ever had? Or?
I worked at the auction galleries for many, many years, so a lot of very expensive baskets went through there. The single basket that brought $110,000 probably still stands as the highest price for a single Nantucket basket.
How many years ago?
2003, around there. It was, I think, in Appleton. Appletons have always done very well at the local auction gallery for some reason. His baskets vary, but the finer ones, there's just a couple collectors that keep going after them. So cleverly, the gallery would save a good Appleton for their annual August sale and put it in. And when any other day of the year or in any other shop on island, we'd be getting $1,500, $2,500 for an Appleton, it would be bringing $20,000, $25,000, $15,000 at the auction, just on that one day of the year. Because I think it came down to 2 individuals who were fighting over them. And this year, it's a complete aberration. The baskets aren't worth that. This really great one came in, and the two fellas hired two different antique dealers to bid for them. The two individuals knew who they were. So they knew, even though neither were present, they're bidding through proxies, they knew who they were actually bidding against. These two individuals hated each other. And they hired two antique dealers who hated each other. It was a perfect storm. And they had deep pockets, and they both, if one of them started dropping out at like 80,000, the antique dealer had his venom saying, no, don't let him get it. And they fought it up to 110,000. Which is absolutely insane. But things like that.
There's an ego war.
Absolutely.
I want them to pay.
Absolutely, and that happens often in auctions.
So based on your discussion here, I guess we can dispel the idea that the baskets came from coopering as well.
Well, no, I wouldn't discard that.
Because it wasn't done on the whales.
But coopers were right here on the wharf. But in farm communities, you can go out to Sturbridge Village, and the cooper at Sturbridge Village taught me what a firkin was. We always used to talk about firkins as just any wooden bucket we'd call a firkin, and he said, no, it's a very specific size. And there's all these different words for different sized little barrels. A firkin was one. So coopers are everywhere. That's just barrel making, and they're found throughout the world. Jamesons had their own coopers on premises for their distillery. They're absolutely everywhere, coopers. And in order to be making staves, construction out of staves, that is drawing on the coopering tradition. So if an individual cooper himself was not directly involved, certainly someone looking at it took idea from that. Though, in a way, the Native American baskets are having staves as well, but they're not inserting into a bottom. Yeah, I see a very distinct influence of the coopering art.
Okay. I've always heard that, but I thought after what you said today, that kind of wiped it out, so I'm glad.
Well, I don't know if I would go so far. It's an influence upon it. They certainly learned from the coopers, but to express it as strongly as the coopers invented this, or this descended directly out of coopering, and I don't know if coopering is a word, if it can be a verb that way. I don't know if I'd be comfortable going that far, but it certainly shows its influence and its drawing on that history.
And there were people who wove on lightships who had previously served on whaling ships, is that right?
Absolutely. Several captains. I think I even jotted their names down here in my notes in case. Wire, James Wire, Charles Ray, Thomas James, and James Chase had all served on whale ships. We're all whaling captains, and I believe every one of those went on to serve on lightships. In that list, it didn't mention Davis Hall, but I thought he was also, he was South Shoals ship, I thought he was also a whaling captain.
Was that Chase, was that a relation of Nancy Chase?
Yes.
I think they're all related.
All chasing each other.
And an easier, all-inclusive answer if it was Gardner or Perry or something. Now, were they the ones related to Nancy? Yes. Small island and a friendly island.